When most people picture the Middle Ages, they imagine towering castles, armored knights, exciting jousting tournaments, and tales of honor and chivalry. Those are the kinds of stories you usually see in historical dramas. The truth, though, was far grimmer than the legends make it seem. Life was filled with constant warfare, brutal sieges, deadly diseases, and devastating famines. Those hardships weren't rare. They were simply part of everyday life during the medieval period. But while all of that was happening, something even darker was taking place behind the scenes. It's a subject that rarely gets mentioned and one that's surrounded by such a strong social taboo that it's definitely not considered dinner conversation. I'm talking about cannibalism, the act of eating human flesh. Cannibalism is widely viewed as one of the most horrifying and barbaric things a person can do to another human being. It feels completely disconnected from the noble image of brave medieval knights that most people have in mind. Even so, the historical records tell a very different story. They reveal that cannibalism wasn't limited to starving peasants driven to desperation during famines. In medieval society, parts of the human body were sometimes considered perfectly acceptable ingredients for medical treatments. And, as you'll soon discover, there were also times when people committed cannibalism for reasons that had nothing to do with survival. So, let's step back into the Middle Ages and explore what pushed people to such shocking extremes, along with the other unusual things they ate simply to stay alive. Welcome to medieval madness. I was so hungry, I felt like I could have eaten a shoe. When people resorted to eating other human beings just to survive, it usually happened within small communities that had been trapped in catastrophic situations like a long siege or a severe local famine. During the 14th century alone, the Kingdom of France experienced 10 documented famines. Some lasted only a single year, while others dragged on for as long as 4 years. England endured those same 10 famines and suffered through 3 additional ones of its own. Beyond that, medieval records also describe 13 separate incidents of cannibalism connected to warfare or prolonged sieges. Sieges became especially common during the Crusades, the series of wars fought between Christians and Muslims from the 11th through the 13th centuries, as both sides struggled to control the Holy Land, particularly the city of Jerusalem, which was sacred to both faiths. One of the most infamous examples happened in December 1098, 2 years after the First Crusade had begun, during the siege of Marat al-Numan. A priest named Fulcher of Chartres served Baldwin I of Jerusalem for many years and documented his experiences in a chronicle called The History of the Expedition to Jerusalem. In his account, Fulcher wrote, "Our people suffered excessive hunger. I shudder to speak of it, because very many of our people, harassed by the madness of excessive hunger, cut off pieces from the buttocks of the Saracens already dead there, which they cooked and chewed and devoured with savage mouths when insufficiently roasted at the fire." From the way Fulcher described the event, it seems clear that he viewed these acts as the result of absolute desperation. To him, the unbearable hunger was justified only by the overwhelming importance of continuing the crusade and reaching the Holy Land. Another eyewitness, the Frenchman Raymond of Aguilé, also participated in the First Crusade. Serving as chaplain to Count Raymond IV of Toulouse, he recorded his experiences in his own chronicle. He wrote, "Meanwhile, there was so great a famine in the army that the people ate most greedily the many already fetid bodies of the Saracens, which they had already cast into the swamps of the city 2 weeks and more ago." According to Raymond, these horrifying scenes shocked not only many of the Crusaders themselves, but also the people who witnessed them. The Saracens and the Turks, however, saw the events very differently. They reportedly said, "Who can resist this people, who are so obstinate and cruel, who now feed on human flesh? These and other most cruel practices, the pagans said, exist among us." The account ends by saying, "For God had given fear of us to all races, but we did not know it." One thing I've learned is that you always have to be careful when reading accounts written during wartime. Propaganda has always been part of war, and most writers naturally tell the story from their own side's point of view. In Raymond's version of events, the Muslim forces are portrayed almost like savage predators, while the Christians are cast as helpless victims fighting to survive. During the early Middle Ages, the Byzantine Empire controlled the great city of Constantinople. Unlike the Western Roman Empire, which collapsed in the 5th century, the Eastern Roman Empire managed to survive for nearly another 1,000 years. It remained standing until Constantinople finally fell to the Ottoman Empire in 1453. One of the people who documented this period was Theophanes the Confessor, an aristocrat who lived during the 8th and 9th centuries. After becoming a monk, he devoted himself to writing chronicles of important historical events. In one of his accounts, he described a 2-year siege in which Arab forces surrounded Constantinople. As the siege dragged on, famine spread through the army. According to Theophanes, since the Arabs were extremely hungry, they ate all their dead animals, horses, asses, and camels. Some even say they put dead men in their own dung in pans, kneaded this, and ate it. Considering conditions like those, it's hardly surprising that he also recorded what happened next. A plague-like disease descended upon them and destroyed a countless throng. Another source, the Chronicle of Zuchnin, which may have been written by Joshua the Stylite, adds even more disturbing details. It claims the Arab soldiers became so desperate that they chewed on their own sandals to quiet their hunger. Another story says they ripped strips of pitch from their ships and chewed on them throughout the day just to ease the pain of starvation. The Muslim scholar and historian al-Tabari also described the terrible conditions, writing that the army had become so desperate they ate everything except dust. She's a man-eater. According to Joshua the Stylite, another horrifying example took place at the very beginning of the Middle Ages, around the years 504 and 505. At that time, the Byzantine Empire, ruled by the Christian Roman Emperor Anastasius, was at war with the Persians. The ancient city of Amida, located in Mesopotamia in what is now modern-day Turkey, was placed under siege. After the Persians captured the city, the suffering only became worse. Joshua wrote, "The population and those who had escaped the sword were in great distress and torment on account of the famine." Fearing that the citizens might eventually help the Romans reclaim the city, the Persians rounded up the surviving men, tied them together, and threw them into the amphitheater, where they were left to starve to death. At first, the Persian soldiers kept the women alive because they needed them to prepare meals. They were given enough food to survive while they worked. Eventually, though, those supplies ran out. The soldiers abandoned the women completely, leaving them with nothing to eat. Joshua describes what happened next in horrifying detail. Many women met together and secretly conspired among themselves. They would go out furtively into the streets of the city at dusk or dawn. Anyone they came across whom they could overpower, whether woman, child, or old man, they would pull indoors, kill, and eat, either boiled or roasted. When Persian soldiers noticed the smell of cooking meat, they investigated. According to the account, the women responsible were tortured and executed. Eventually, however, the Persian general allowed the surviving women to eat the bodies of those who had already died, and after that they did so openly. While some survived by consuming human flesh, others searched the streets and public squares for anything remotely edible. They gathered old shoes, worn-out leather soles, and whatever other scraps they could find, eating things that would normally have been completely unthinkable. The Greek scholar and historian Procopius also recorded that, during the Gothic War, farming came to a halt across parts of Italy. In the summer of 539, many people abandoned their homes and made their way toward the coast, hoping they would have a better chance of finding food there. In Tuscany, people became so desperate that they ground up acorns and turned them into bread just to stay alive. Even then, disease spread rapidly through the starving population, and countless people died. According to the records, nearly 50,000 Roman farmers lost their lives. One account describes the horrifying effects of starvation. People lost a lot of weight and all color. Furthermore, they lost all moisture from their skin, which looked like leather tightly stretched over bones. People turned from gray to black. The same source tells an even more disturbing story, claiming that 2 women living in a village near Ariminum killed and ate 17 men. Many starving people died after trying to survive by eating grass. There were so many deaths that no one had the strength or the will to bury the bodies. The corpses were left where they fell, and the account even says that birds refused to feed on them because there was almost nothing left but skin and bone. Preying on the weak. In the late 12th century, Michael the Syrian wrote his World Chronicle, where he described a terrible famine that he said struck Germanicia, in what is now modern-day Turkey, around the year 646. During that disaster, people reportedly survived by eating wild animals along with what he called loathsome beasts. He also tells the story of a man he described as an impostor monk, a criminal named Alicia, who lived alone in a cave. According to Michael, the man kidnapped and murdered children, eventually eating 51 of them. To make matters even worse, he would later visit the grieving parents and pretend to comfort them, taking advantage of the trust they placed in him because they believed he was a holy man. The chronicle goes on to say that he also murdered and ate a deacon before a young priest finally exposed him. After his arrest, the authorities sentenced him to death by crucifixion for his crimes. Around that same period, another horrifying incident was said to have taken place in Lebanon. 2 women were living together, and one of them had an infant. As famine tightened its grip on the region, the child's mother went into the fields to gather grass because there was nothing else left to eat. While she was away, the other woman, along with 3 accomplices, killed the baby, cooked the body, and ate it. When the local people learned what had happened, those responsible were captured and burned to death. Other accounts from the Syrian famine and drought of 687 claim that some mothers became so desperate they cooked and ate their own children. The 11th century Benedictine monk and chronicler Rodolf Glaber described similarly horrifying scenes during a famine that lasted 5 years across large parts of Europe. According to his writings, starvation drove people beyond all reason, with grown men eating their own mothers while women did the same to their babies. It's almost impossible for me to imagine just how desperate people must have been to reach that point. The strange world of medieval medicine. Not every account of cannibalism was tied to survival. Some historical records suggest that people consumed human flesh by choice rather than out of necessity. Toward the end of Mongol rule, the respected scholar Tai Xing-ai, who lived during China's Yuan dynasty in the 13th and 14th centuries, claimed that soldiers from northern China actually enjoyed eating human flesh. According to his writings, they sometimes killed civilians simply for what he described as their culinary pleasure. He wrote that young children were considered the most desirable victims. Some were reportedly roasted whole inside large jars, while others were tied to iron grates and roasted alive. In other cases, victims were placed inside bags, dropped into enormous pots, and boiled alive. Tai Xing-ai also claimed that when the meat wasn't eaten immediately, the bodies were cut into smaller pieces, salted, and dried for later use. According to his account, if the victim was a man, only the thighs might be removed. If the victim was a woman, only the breasts were sometimes taken. During the Crusades, another disturbing practice also emerged. Historical sources claim that both Christian and Muslim soldiers harvested body parts from the corpses of their fallen enemies. One body part seemed to be especially valuable: the gallbladder. People believed it possessed powerful medicinal or even magical properties, so it was often taken from the bodies of the dead. That belief wasn't entirely new. The 1st century Roman author and natural philosopher Pliny the Elder argued at the beginning of his famous work, Natural History, that magic itself had originally grown out of medicine. His writings remained highly respected throughout the Middle Ages and influenced the way many people thought about healing. The idea that blood could cure disease had been around for centuries. The ancient Romans, for example, believed the blood of gladiators held extraordinary powers. Some even drank it while it was still warm, directly from the wounds of dying fighters in the arena. They thought it could heal illnesses such as epilepsy and other disorders that affected the brain. By the 13th century, the well-known Scottish scholar Michael Scott was promoting another shocking remedy. He claimed that bathing in a mixture of hot water and the blood of either a dog or a 2-year-old child was a certain cure for leprosy. To me, that's one of the most disturbing examples of medieval medicine. If I shift my attention farther east to China, I find a very different but equally unsettling tradition. During the Tang dynasty, which lasted for roughly 300 years from the early 7th century to the early 10th century, the use of human body parts in medicine became widely accepted. One medical text among many, the Benkao Gangmu, included prescriptions that called for human organs, bodily fluids, and even human waste as ingredients in various remedies. The list was astonishingly broad. Everything from earwax and powdered human bone to human breath and even the penis appeared in certain medicinal preparations. Another practice developed from the Chinese ideal of filial piety, the belief that children should show complete devotion, love, and respect toward their parents and ancestors. Because caring for elderly parents or parents-in-law was considered a sacred responsibility, some people believed they should sacrifice parts of their own bodies to help heal sick family members. Most of those who made these sacrifices were women, especially daughters-in-law. To prepare what was believed to be a healing remedy, a woman would tightly bind her upper arm or thigh with a strip of cloth to reduce the bleeding. Using a sharp knife, she would carefully cut away a small piece of flesh from that part of her body. The meat was immediately placed into hot soup, which was then served to the sick or dying relative in the hope that it would restore their health. Historians believe this form of voluntary self-sacrifice may have begun as early as the 7th century and continued, in some areas, all the way into the 20th century. That brings me to the end of this journey through one of the darkest corners of medieval history. Thanks so much for sticking with me through this episode of Medieval Madness. And if hearing all these stories somehow left you feeling hungry, well, first of all, I have to ask what's wrong with you. On a more serious note, I've also put together another video that's available through Patreon and YouTube memberships, where I take a much lighter look at favorite medieval foods from different countries. If that sounds interesting, and you'd like to help support the channel, memberships start at just £3 a month. If you decide to join one of the higher tiers, you'll even get your name featured on screen, along with everyone else who's helping make these videos possible. I truly appreciate all the support you've given me. It means a lot, and it allows me to keep creating the best medieval history content I can. Until next time, I hope you have a great week, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers!